Now we're in Galatians chapter number 2 and verse number 1. We have dealt with the man Barnabas. When Paul went up to Jerusalem, then 14 years after, I went up again to Jerusalem. This would be for the Jerusalem Council with Barnabas, and we have spent a number of days dealing with the man Barnabas. And then Silas is not mentioned in this verse. Silas is a very important part of Paul's second missionary tour. And I spent a couple of days dealing with the man Silas, because it is Silas, when Paul and Barnabas had their falling out and separated their ways, divided company. The man Silas then enters the picture. And Silas traveled with Paul on the second missionary tour. But now the second man mentioned in verse number 1 is this man by the name of Titus. Now we have a New Testament book that Paul addressed to the man Titus, 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus. That book is addressed to this man. Titus accompanied Paul from Antioch in Syria to Jerusalem with Barnabas and was a part of the Jerusalem Council. Titus was an early Christian missionary, and from reading the book of Acts, he was a preaching companion of the Apostle Paul. Now, there are a number of places in the Pauline epistles where Titus is mentioned. I don't have all of those references written down. I didn't take the time to go through the concordance and write all of them down, but on a number of occasions, the man Titus is identified and mentioned, and in several of Paul's books, the man Titus is mentioned. Also, as I pointed out a moment ago, there is the book of Titus, the book that is addressed to this man. Now, this is a very interesting thing, because of the matter of circumcision was brought up concerning Titus. It is generally believed that he was a Gentile that converted Christianity. In verse number 3, but neither Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. Now, I'll have something to say about that again when we arrive at verse number 3. But it is interesting that the man Timothy, there was a question concerning his circumcision, but no question concerning the man Titus. But Titus, being a Greek, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. Now, Titus was probably from Antioch, and it is said that he had studied Greek philosophy. Some of the men that I have read after said that he studied Greek philosophy and poetry in his early years. There's no doubt in my mind that Titus is a convert of the Apostle Paul, and that would be one of the reasons that we find the man Titus traveling with the Apostle Paul, and also find the man Titus attending the Jerusalem Council in AD 50. That might have made some of the Jews at the Jerusalem Council a bit nervous and perhaps uneasy, because here is a Gentile. I mean, a Gentile on both sides, maternally and paternally. A Gentile that is attending this conference, Jerusalem Council, that they had in AD 50. Now, the matter of Mosaic law was at the heart of this council, and Paul was questioned as to why he did not include the law of Moses and the temple there in Jerusalem in the preaching of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Titus, being a Gentile, would have had a clear and totally unbiased view of Mosaic law. Titus would have understood the inability of the two systems to work together in harmony. He would have comprehended that. He would have had a working knowledge as a Gentile that you cannot mix law and grace together. Again, Paul says, but neither Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. Now, this is an interesting thing. Titus, being a Gentile, was not compelled to be circumcised. I suppose that the leaders in the Jerusalem council probably were a bit hesitant to demand of Paul that if Titus is going to travel with him, that he would have to be circumcised. Remember, the matter of circumcision is a matter of Mosaic law. It is a legal institution. And it was never commanded to anyone outside the lineage of Abraham. Abraham, and then down to Isaac, and then down to Jacob. And of course from Jacob to the 12 sons, God changing Jacob's name to Israel. And then at Mount Sinai, the matter of circumcision becomes a part of Mosaic law. Now, the casual Bible reader will recognize that the matter of circumcision, and we're not talking about necessarily for hygiene, but for a legal religious observance, or as a mark of identification, that circumcision was never demanded outside or beyond the house of Israel. Titus is a Gentile, and Peter, James, and John, with their legal observance, in fact, they're questioning Paul because Paul is not preaching the matter of Mosaic law. And yet they were reticent and did not demand that the man Titus receive circumcision in the flesh. Now, Timothy, on the other hand, was circumcised. Timothy is also a Gentile. But Timothy's mother is a Jew and his father is a Greek. Titus, mother and father, are both Gentiles. Now, let me explain something to you. The Bible is a paternal book. So, in the scriptures, the mother is, I don't want to say immaterial, but the children are whatever race the father would have been. That's why Joseph, down in the land of Egypt, could marry an Egyptian. The daughter of the high priest, Potiphar, the priest of On, Joseph marries his daughter. And we know of two sons produced by that marriage. One is Ephraim and the other is Manasseh. And Ephraim and Manasseh are Jews and are named among the tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel, though their mother is an Egyptian. The mother doesn't matter in the situation as far as her genealogy or her race would be concerned. It is the father. If the father is a Jew, though the mother is a Gentile, the children, the offspring, are Jews. It's a very interesting thing. One of President Trump's daughters is married to a Jew, though she's a Gentile. And those children are Jews. So 1/3 of President Trump's grandchildren are Jews. Though all of his children are Gentiles, the daughter married a Jewish man, which would make the children produced by that union to be Jews. Now that's exactly what I read in a King James Bible. The Bible is a paternal book, not a maternal book. It is paternal. It depends on who the father is, and the children will be what the father is. Now, in Timothy's situation, his daddy's a Gentile. His mother is a Jew. His father is a Gentile. And that means that Timothy was not a Jew. Timothy is a Gentile, but because his mother is a Jew, there may have been greater scrutiny placed upon him because of the brethren. And, of course, the Bible records very clearly that because of the brethren, for the sake of the brethren, the man Timothy was circumcised, though he's a Gentile. While the man Titus, also a Gentile, is never compelled to be circumcised. The Jewish lineage there, although Timothy's not a Jew, yet he came through a Jewish womb, the womb of his mother. And that would have caused some of the Jewish brethren to whom Paul was preaching to have an area of offense. They would have been offended by that, and for that reason, for the sake of not causing alienation or offense, Paul had Timothy circumcised. Now, this matter of Titus being a Gentile, I think is extremely important. You see, Paul's traveling among the Gentiles, taking the gospel to the Gentiles. Though Paul himself is a Jew, an Hebrew of the Hebrews, in fact, mother and father are both Jews of the tribe of Benjamin. But because Titus had been won to Christ, and Titus, a Gentile, is traveling with the Apostle Paul, there would have been a link between the man Titus and the Gentiles to whom Paul is preaching. I don't know that Paul had any difficulty at all. I don't think he had the first amount of difficulty in preaching the gospel of the grace of God to the Gentiles that often heard him. But I do believe that by having Titus travel with him, Titus, a Gentile, that revealed to the Gentiles to whom Paul is preaching that the gospel of the grace of God is not a Jewish message, it is not a legal message. The gospel of the grace of God is a universal message that is available to every lost sinner, red and yellow, black and white, Gentile, Jew, male, female, it doesn't matter. The gospel of the grace of God is available to any man, to every man, and to all men that are willing to believe the gospel and be saved. In the year 1856, Paul departs from Asia, and he sent Titus from Ephesus to Corinth to seek to deal with the problems that had arisen in the church at Corinth. You can read 1st and 2nd Corinthians, especially 1st Corinthians. And there was a series of questions that the Corinthian believers had written in a letter and sent that to the Apostle Paul with a battery of problems that had arisen. Now you talk about a church that has problems. The church at Corinth had problems. I think I'd be hesitant to name a Baptist church, Corinth Baptist Church. I think I'd be hesitant. It just, they had a lion's share of problems. Many of the Corinthian believers were Gentiles, and Paul had every confidence in the man Titus that he could send Titus from the church at Ephesus. John the Beloved later pastored the church at Ephesus. The church at Ephesus is a part of the churches in the region of Galatia, and one of the churches that we find in the Revelation prophecy. Paul built that church, established it, founded it, and Titus was laboring there in that pulpit. And Paul the Apostle sends Titus away from Ephesus and down to Corinth. Paul had every confidence that Titus could handle all the problems that had arisen at Corinth, that he could deal with every difficulty that had arisen. During this journey, Titus served as a courier for what Paul termed that severe letter that he wrote in the church at Corinth. Now, I know there's some speculation about this severe letter that Paul writes, and I've read after some men that think that that was a letter that has been lost to the sands of time, that was not canonized, and that we don't have that now. There are other writers that believe that that severe letter that is referenced in 1 Corinthians is 2 Corinthians. Now, I can't argue either way, and I think that we'd be a bit foolish to spend a great deal of time belaboring the point over this. But it was the man Titus, a Gentile, that served as a courier, that kept the Apostle Paul informed, and whom Paul had enough confidence in and believed in to the degree that he could send the man Titus to Corinth with absolute confidence that whatever difficulty arose, whatever circumstance arose, the man Titus was well qualified and well capable of dealing with that. One of the reasons that the man Titus might have been received as well as he was in Ephesus and in Corinth is because of the fact that he was a Gentile that had never been under the law and that was truly a New Testament believer in the death, burial, and resurrection of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Now, my time has gotten away from me on the program today. The Lord willing, we will continue with this with the Lord's help on the program tomorrow.
View the website at thebrightspothour.com. You may write the Bright Spot Hour at Post Office Box 4,